So one or two things I've probably made quite clear on this channel already is that there's two things I like in music: progression and a lot of riffs. And Wildhoney, the record we're talking about today, is a great example of both of those things. I jokingly called this one the dark side of the 90s, and yeah, it's kind of true, because Tiamat were a band who formed in Sweden in the year 1987. And for a long time, Tiamat started off as more of a death metal band. You know, that death doom sound I've already discussed with when it comes to Paradise Lost, My Dying Bride, and Anathema. The very slow, lumbering riffs, darker, depressing atmospheres, the growls, you know, the whole shebang. But then, like a lot of bands who started off with this style, Tiamat, the frontman, especially Johan Edlund, began to tire of this, and gradually, with the band's subsequent releases, The Astral Sleep and Clouds, began to move away, incorporate more clean vocal styles, spoken word passages, acoustic elements, a lot of instrumentation. But what made Tiamat really interesting in this period was Johan's love of the psychedelic. Massive Pink Floyd fan, and so he decided he wanted to sound like his favorite band. That's how he put himself in this time period. And so with the release of Clouds especially, Tiamat started to get a lot weirder, a lot more experimental, and a lot more psychedelic. The guy was probably doing a ton of LSD at this point in time, and you can tell. Clouds I won't go too much into Clouds here, but it's important for the subject of this record as well, was a very much transitional album, is what it's usually called, where the band hasn't quite shed their prior style, but hasn't quite fully embraced their new one either. But sometimes transition albums can end up a lot more interesting than, in my opinion, either of the two albums before it or after it. Because in this case, the Clouds, there are some elements that are very death metal and don't really quite gel with the psychedelic, and there are some with psychedelic that don't really gel with the death metal, but that's kind of cool, though. It's really cool to hear a death metal song break into a weird spoken word chorus like the first track on that record, or to have some very atmospheric verses leading into a really fast, thundering chorus, and you get that on Clouds. But anyway, enough about the previous record. We're talking about Wildhoney today, and Wildhoney is Johan's ambitions fully realized. After the band's touring of Clouds, that record, he wasn't really happy with the production or how it turned out, even though he loved some of the ideas and some of the songs on it, which were written mostly by himself and bass player John Hagel. So after the tour for Clouds, he actually sacked half the band, and so it was only, in the studio, it was only really him and John Hagel recording, with the producers and a bunch of session musicians comprising the rest of the band's lineup. Now, I've spoken a bit on this before with band synergy as well. When it sounds like a whole band or a whole collective isn't really on the same page, you can somewhat tell every now and then, but in this case you can't. Because Wildhoney is just so... One thing about this record that it kills is the atmosphere. Much like Pink Floyd before them. And I'm going to be mentioning Pink Floyd a few times here, so if you don't like them, get used to it. I'm sorry. There's no way to talk about Tiamat without mentioning Pink Floyd. There's no way to talk about a lot of prog without mentioning Pink Floyd, come to think of it, but more so in this case. Because this sounds very much like a dark, goth Pink Floyd. Wildhoney is often thrown into the gothic rock, gothic metal genres, but I don't understand why it's not normally considered a prog record, because this record progs like absolute hell. Right from the get-go, we get some bird sampling and some slow build into the first track, titled Whatever That Hurts, when we're greeted with a doom metal riff, very much like the ones that Tiamat have usually employed. But what happens next is really interesting, because from that doom metal riff, we get some heavy percussion, and then quiet, and we get some mellotron and some reverb tinged guitar with some Middle Eastern scales. And at this point, you should be thinking, what the fuck is going on? Because you're absolutely right. This is just off the wall, man. It's such a cool transition. To this day, it blows my mind. Like, it's not even a little bit psychedelic. They went right off the deep end. It's so cool. Like, it's one of the coolest, most drastic transitions I've heard in a gothic metal or a metal song to this day, I think. It's so cool. You should check it out. Especially the video. The video for Whatever That Hurts is a trip. If you like creepy wooden doll imagery, psychedelic atmospheres and textures, check that out. You will not be disappointed. Anyway, for the rest of the track, we get a cross between spoken word sections in the verses, with Johan utilizing more of that, but we get more of his growls in the chorus, showing that this is still indeed a metal record with some harsh vocals. That being said, Johan's growls are a bit easier to take. They're more of a gritty yell than they are a Cookie Monster death metal growl. He's kind of strayed away from that death metal aspect. And for people who aren't a fan of death metal, don't worry, there's not really a lot of growls on this record. There's a bit here and there. Johan's voice is a bit gritty on a lot of the tracks, but that's just kind of the more gothic gritty. If you're familiar with rough, gravelly, Dracula, 6 Feet Underground kind of sound, you kind of have a good idea. Maybe even in this case, Dracula post-bong hit. Like, let's get real. But the rest of the record, we're treated to this overall hybrid of metal and of psychedelic. The following track is called The AR, A-R, and it revolves around the pentagram, so, some occult nature here, and that's to be expected when it comes to goth, or even from bands who are named after, Sumerian goddesses. Probably shouldn't be that much of a shock. But the R is much more of a metal song centered around a heavy, powerful riff, but has some atmospheric choruses and some atmospheric bridges that very much fit within Wildhoney's established sound. And then Wildhoney is interesting too because very much like a Pink Floyd album, there are only 6 proper tracks or songs, I would say. The rest are interludes that set the tone for the track following it, and they do a fantastic job. Like after the R, we get 25th Floor, which seeks its way into the nature themes found in the track Gaia, which is one of Tiamat's most well-known, most well-loved songs. It has a very memorable chorus revolving nature, spiders, snakes, little mice. You hear that line repeated a lot. That's what's cool about Wildhoney to me, is it has that dark, lush atmosphere, but at the same time, it has more of a nature element. Like a kind of pagan, the Wicker Man, the classic movie, not the Nicolas Cage one. If someone mentions the fucking Not the Beast line around me again, I swear to God. More around that theme. Or if you've seen the movie Apostle as well, that kind of nature gothic. I need to think of more examples here for that, but that's the best way I could describe this record. After Gaia, we take a headfirst dive right back into the satanic themes with Visionaire, and once again, if you're not into that, that's cool. I don't think Johann's a Satanist. I think he just finds it fascinating, like most metal lyricists. But anyway, after Visionaire, we get Kaleidoscope, which ducks into the following track, Do You Dream of Me, which is quietly plucked for the most part, almost like a ballad. But then we got this nice little kind of Latin groove influenced breakdown near the end to close the track. Followed by Planets, which is a 3-minute instrumental that brings back more of the cosmic themes, the spacey kind of sounds, which for a psychedelic album are an absolute must-have. And then we got the closing epic, 8 minutes in length, A Pocket-Sized Sun, which is, of course, referencing LSD at this point. A lot of spoken word sections. There's another female vocalist in there. Has a very slow outro with some twinkling guitar effects. It sounds like you're going from ground to a trip, which is fitting for this record. I don't judge, I don't care. If you wanted to throw on something and throw this record on and just enjoy it for 42 minutes, by all means, this is a great record for that. There's nothing really scary about it. A lot of it is very moderate paced. Nothing will kind of thrash your brains out about it. And that's also kind of why I love it too, because this is a record that's not, I wouldn't say somebody who's not too well versed in metal would have a hard time taking. Like, yeah, there's some growls here and there, but the record's not hinging on them. It's not even hinging on the giant riffs. They're more there as an accent. If anything, it's just that atmosphere, just the flow of it. And that's what absolutely makes this a prog record to me, is that it just, for its 42 minutes, it just envelops you like a friggin' blanket. It's so strong, it's so heavy, and it's just so unique. There were a lot of great gothic metal records released around this time, and a lot of good experimental ones too. Moonspell's Irreligious, another great record with another orange album cover. There's something about orange album covers in goth music. Lacuna Coil's Coma Lies as well. Orange album cover, a bit more experimental effort from that band. I don't know what the deal with that is, goth bands in orange, but whatever. In this case, if you haven't checked out Wildhoney, I'd recommend it for a variety of reasons. Lyrically, it's interesting too. Johann's got a really interesting lyrical style, choosing a wide variety of topics to write, and he's definitely writing them while he's high. So I could go on for a long time about this record because it's just so good, it's so cool. It's still viewed as Tiamat's probably their crowning achievement, although some would argue the record following it, A Deeper Kind of Slumber, rivals it. I would say in this case that Wildhoney is definitely the more groundbreaking of the two. Deeper Kind of Slumber is a fantastic record. Have that one on vinyl too. It's great. It's actually longer, so you get to stay in the atmosphere for that much longer. It goes more into the progressive rock direction. There's no harsh vocals on that one. There's probably actually more experimentation. I recall a few more electronic based tracks or slower tracks and more ponderous ones on that one, and also an 11-minute epic on that one. But I think, once again, Wildhoney is also a transition record, much like I said of Clouds, which is why I brought it up. Because Wildhoney is the band transitioning the last of their metal influences into more of almost an ambient gothic rock sound. And after Deeper Kind of Slumber, Tiamat would kind of stay in the more gothic, atmospheric gothic rock stack for the rest of their career. So it kind of makes sense, but at the same time, even though Wildhoney is still quite raw around the edges, all the gold just shines through, and this is just a fantastic listen. Don't let the gothicness throw you off a little bit. And I don't know if I've said this before, but goth and gothic are two very different things. Gothic, of course, referring to Dracula, Frankenstein, Haunting of Hill House, H.P. Lovecraft. If you like that kind of atmosphere, that's what we're talking about today. Goth referring, of course, to, what you're probably thinking of. You're thinking of Hot Topic, you're thinking of him, you know, Vilvalo, that's goth. But Tiamat's more gothic. There's a bit of goth in there, always is. But if you haven't checked out Wildhoney yet, I highly recommend it. It's a great intro to both gothic metal, even a bit of doom metal, and the dark progressive rock of the 90s. Anyways, at the end of the day, check this record out. If you can get past the growls, they're only really in the first track, but they don't hinder it that much. We'll get on to more happier stuff soon. The weather's getting a bit brighter up here, so I'll come out of my shell and stop listening to goth stuff. But until then, have a good rest of your day.